Welcome to Com 400, Chapter 15, Advertising Research. Advertising didn't used to use research for many years, and more recently it began to use research quite a bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about that this week based on Chapter 15. Now, the research now is quite common because of three things. Increased competition is one. There's a lot of increase in advertising competition. Also, mass markets and mounting costs. Now, let's take a look at those individually. You have many more sources that are out there, and this was happening before social media even came along. Now everybody can have a blog and grow into something. Research is needed quite a bit more, or is desired quite a bit more. Much research in advertising that's done today is called applied research. It's different than scientific research, which is pure research, theoretical research. So research in advertising is generally applied. You're looking for a specific answer, and specifically it is applied research that attempts to solve a single narrow problem. And usually that has to do with maybe what people are buying, what different demographics are buying, what things. An example of applied research would be which is more effective, advertising on Facebook or advertising in the Peoria Journal-Star, and it would be different for different audiences. Advertising research also does not use special methods. Now, sometimes people are confused by this because there are methods that are adapted for use, but they are not. They are still scientific, and by saying they're not special methods, basically, advertising research is based on scientific research, which is why we spend so much time on scientific research, because that's what business research is based on. So advertising uses traditional scientific methods, and these methods are adapted for advertising. There's a couple of kinds of adapted methods, and three of them that we'll look at closely are copy research, media research, and campaign assessment research. Now we'll get to all of those. Campaign assessment research is actually a combination of the previous two, but let's start off right now with copy research, also called copy testing. So copy testing refers to research about how to develop effective ads, and then determines which of several ads are most effective. Now, what this would be is, I'll give you an example. I had a student who was working with a casino. She designed ads for the casino. So they wanted a change in what they were doing. So she made 3 different ads as part of a class we were doing. Made 3 different ads. The project was for her to go out and test those, and she did, and found out that everybody really liked one better than the others. Another example I sometimes give is there's a local person in town who in central Illinois, and he has a exercise place that sells exercise equipment very well. He sells bicycles as well, and he loves peppers, and so he has them all over his ads, and it confuses people. And we had students one time who were doing doing a campaign project on his shop, and they did 3 ads, one that had a lot of peppers, one that had some, and one that had none, and people liked the one that had none much better. They kept thinking that if there was a pepper in it, a chili pepper, it must be a restaurant, which was confusing. So, but that would be a method of copy testing, testing the ad to see which one works best. And interestingly, sometimes I'll say, I think people are going to like this one looks much better to me. You find out that a lot of people in different demographics like different things. So copy testing can take place at any stage in the campaign process, from the very beginning. We're just getting ideas to a finished ad where you're trying to find out if it actually is effective. It may involve pre-testing at first to determine the best copy and headlines. You might have several headlines, you might have different copies, you might have several models, and you can switch those in, show them to an audience, and see which ones the audience decides. That's a very practical example of what research can do. Okay, so 3 ways to categorize copy testing. 2 of them make sense, and one of them you probably haven't heard of the word before. The first one is cognitive, which is knowing. We'll look at each of these in depth. The second one is affective, which is feeling, how you feel. And the last one, this sounds like I'm going to mispronounce it, but the last one is conative. And conative has to do with doing, has to do with behavior. And so that's a very important aspect of advertising, because buying and purchasing is ultimately what you're trying to do, and that is a conative aspect. So let's look at some of these different kinds of tests, though. One of the tests that are used in advertising is unaided recall. There's aided recall and unaided recall. Unaided recall has to do where the question is asked. Perhaps, okay, you watched a program last night. Maybe you were watching Joe Exotic on Tiger King, and so somebody asks you, what ads do you remember during that show? Actually, that was on Netflix, so that would be none. But say you were watching a program, Modern Family. Perhaps you watched Modern Family, and so you want to find out what ads somebody remembered. You would say, do you remember any ads? What ads do you remember? And they would give you, that's unaided. You get whatever on the top of mind awareness. There's no suggestion. So that's the best. It shows that the most powerful advertising shows up in unaided recall. Now let's look at aided recall. Aided recall is different. They give you some possibilities. They say, okay, you watched Modern Family last night, and here are a couple of things. Do you remember seeing an ad for any of these? Do you remember seeing an ad for Pepsi? Do you remember seeing an ad for Coke? Do you remember seeing an ad for Sprite? Do you remember seeing an ad for something else? And it jogs the mind, and so people can do it. It's the difference between writing a fill-in-the-blank question and writing multiple choice. So you have 1 and 4, where the other is more difficult, and that's why aided recall is not quite as powerful. Okay, let's go to the second thing that we were talking about, affective dimension copy research. And this is actually important. It looks at attitudes particularly, and whether you might look at somebody's attitude and then show them an ad and see if their attitude changes. Say I'm trying to think of an emotional ad. They might look at the ad that a couple years ago Colin Kaepernick did, and a great, powerful ad, and see how whether you were affected, emotionally, positively by that. That would be what affective research does. So this is characterized by questions such as, do you like this ad? And we're going to continue. We've looked at two kinds of copy testing. We looked at cognitive. We looked at affective. We haven't looked at conative. We're going to do that in our next video.